A reading from 1 Kings. At Horeb, the mount of God, Elijah came to a cave and spent the night there. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant and thrown down your altars and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." He said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind, and after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." Then the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael as king over Aram. After, you shall anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, as king over Israel. And you shall anoint Elijah, son of Shaphat, of Abel Meholah, as prophet in your place." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
A gospel reading from the 14th chapter of Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Immediately he made the disciples get onto a boat and go ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain all by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from land, from the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking towards them on the sea. But then the disciples saw him walking on the sea. They were terrified, saying, "It's a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, this is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him slowly, "And you command me Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And come towards Jesus. But then he noticed the strong wind. He became frightened and began to sink. He cried loud, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, and did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." A gospel.
Grace and peace to you, my friends in Christ. I don't have experience on boats or ships in bad weather, but I've certainly had my fair share of paddling on waves that are rough. And one adventure on Lake Vermilion with two of my best friends, we got nailed by a storm overnight. We didn't sleep much because there was lightning that forced us to sit on our own personal flotation devices while we were in our tent so that we wouldn't get electrocuted because our tent was on a rock face. We woke up the next morning, and usually you think, oh, yay, the storm, and now it's going to be nice and pretty and calm, and that was not the case. We looked out from our campsite, and Lake Vermilion was full of just large whitecaps. These large waves that would rise up and then come splashing down, and they were horrible conditions to go canoeing in. So me and my friends decided we were going to just wait it out. So we slowly finished our breakfast. We packed up our stuff. We kind of took our time, but by the afternoon, the conditions hadn't improved. This was before we had cell phones, and so there was no way to call ahead and say, hey, things are going to be slow here. We also had eaten all of our food, and so we decided, because of that, we didn't want anyone to worry about us. We were gonna try to go back. How bad could it be? Well, just getting into the canoe was almost impossible because as the canoe was right next to the shore, the waves would batter our canoe, and it was pretty rough. Yet we finally got into our canoe and we embarked on the 1.5 mile portage, or on the 1.5 mile paddle that it was going to take to get back to Camp Vermilion. And we had the confidence of Viking sailors as we set out on our mission. But the waves were really big. And as we were paddling, it takes a lot of work to keep a canoe afloat. And especially as I was steering from the back, I had to perpendicularly steer into each wave and hope that the water that would splash over wouldn't land into the canoe. But unfortunately, we were taking on a lot of water really fast. So as I'm trying to steer us towards the shoreline, I saw this land, and I thought maybe we could just get to that land and be able to get a little break and be able to stop there and rest. But the direction of the waves made it just impossible. There was so much effort in order to just even keep the canoe straight and keep afloat. And little did I know, we would actually get to rest on that point, but only after our canoe swamped. It went under. We took on too much water, and so the three of us, kind of hanging by the thread on this canoe, paddling towards shore with our sunk canoe, we finally made it to land. It was frightening, exhausting, humbling, and once we made it to land, memorable. We were just happy to be safe. These Viking sailors had met our match, ironically, on Norway Point. Right? So we walked across this point, and one of our friends did not look like he was going to be able to keep this paddling going. So we left him behind. We said, Tim, you stay with this stuff. Me and Ryan decided we were going to finish the rest of the paddle. So we got all of our stuff. We left it on the point, and me and Ryan, we paddled back to camp. And don't worry, we got a fishing boat, and we went back and got Tim later. But on the other side of this point, we noticed something. We noticed that the waves were manageable because they were being blocked by Center Island. However, at no time during our paddling that day, as the waves were slamming up against us and over our canoe, did I think to myself, wow, God, this is a really hard thing that you've put in front of us. But you know what? What if I just got out of my canoe right now and walked to shore instead? I mean, Peter does. He gets out of his boat and walks to Jesus. If he can do it, why can't I? And because I didn't think of that, does that mean that I lack faith? Peter walks on water and puts his trust in Jesus until the doubts creep in. And as soon as he feels the wind on the back of his neck, he starts to panic and sink. And Jesus says, "Oh, you of little faith, why do you doubt?" Perhaps it's not just Thomas who's the only disciple who should have earned that nickname. But if I'm putting myself in the mind of the disciples, how is it that Jesus can defy the laws of science? And how can he do the impossible? How can he expect Peter to successfully do this too? I've had enough experience in a canoe to know that I'd rather be in a canoe taking water than out of the canoe flailing in the lake. That's not a faith statement, friends. That's a life lesson. Now, these disciples have experienced a few life lessons along the way. In just a few short period of time with Jesus, he's been able to show them things to see how truly special he is. But I wonder if the disciples are starting to think to themselves, is it really worth it? Think about it. Just in the last few days, they've experienced the despair and sadness of learning about John the Baptist's killing. There's certainly emotions that have contributed to fear and skepticism about whether they'd be next. They keep wondering, if we stick with Jesus, why won't we experience the same fate? Most of these guys have families. They've got loved ones. They've got a work experience that they could easily fall back on. Do you think that quitting crossed their minds? I'm sure it was tempting. But then the miracles happened. Jesus feeds thousands of people out of nothing. He walks on water during a storm. He even tells Peter to walk on the water, and he does the same. And then, when Jesus is back in the boat, the storm ceases, and even the wind is obedient to Jesus. If you're a disciple, that's a lot to take. As I gather with a group of disciples each week on Tuesday morning, the old guys had a lot of questions about the miracle. And I acknowledge the challenge of accepting a miracle versus also understanding the scientific explanation of how it worked. We all have a different lens in which we interpret a story like this into our lives. But my parting words to the group was that I hope that when you leave this place, that you are more filled than when you showed up. You're more filled with faith, maybe more filled with knowledge, maybe more filled with formation, and at the very least, when we're at Keys, they're more filled with good food. But I hope that they're filled with something that gives them sustenance when they leave, more than when they got there. Do we need to understand how a miracle happens to believe that the miracle happened? I think instead of trying to solve the riddle, this story points to a truth about Jesus, and it's the confession that the disciples make. The very last words of our reading is, truly, Jesus is the Son of God. Dr. Caroline Lewis says they come to this conclusion because they haven't done this through study or lecture or parable, but they come to that conclusion because Jesus compels them to get into a boat, sends them into a storm. They struggle through the night, but then Jesus reveals himself as the answer, and that it's his presence through all of this that the disciples figure out who he is. How might that change our daily lives? It's that the miracle matters. The miracle matters because Peter walked until he lost trust. It matters because in the middle of that storm, Jesus was with him, extending a hand. And even when he fell in, Peter was saved. And that's where Jesus dwells with us. Because we are like Peter, and we are sinful, and we do turn away from Jesus, and we lose trust, and we make dumb decisions, and we continue to choose selfish ways that turn us from God. And sometimes we say things that we shouldn't, and sometimes we put ourselves better than others, and sometimes we do things that harm each other, or we ignore the needs of someone in need, even though we know we should do something. And that is our reality. And yet, through all of that, Jesus still forgives, and Jesus still loves, and Jesus is still with us. It might often lend itself to feelings like well, we aren't worthy. When we think about that, we think about what we've done, we might start to think, well, we don't deserve to be saved. How could Jesus possibly notice us when all of this other stuff that we've done keeps happening? Why even bother? It's because Jesus, God in the flesh, lived among us. And that when pain and fear and doubt and lack of faith creeps in, and that's our experience, Jesus knows. And Jesus understands, and Jesus deeply wants us to know that those are perfectly normal and natural feelings for us to have. And when those feelings happen, we are not the ones who will save ourselves. Jesus saves. Jesus is the one who pulls us up through his presence in our life. Jesus is what centers us when the waves come crashing upon us. Life is full of waves. Just think about that. Think about your last week, your last month, your last year. Think about being in that canoe. Maybe there's been a few ripples, annoyance when things don't quite go your way. It might even be stuff out of our control, like the weather or when our team loses. That's not another Vikings reference. Those ripples hit our boat, but we move right on. But sometimes those waves are a little bigger. Challenges at school or work. Maybe it's stress with family members or friends. Maybe it's the effect of the economy or geopolitical decisions that are also out of our control. We might feel like we're taking on a little bit more water. But it's not the kind of water that's filling the boat unless we don't deal with it. And we don't deal with it in healthy ways. And sometimes that water can eventually overwhelm us. And then there's those times where those big waves appear and we can see them coming. We see these waves and we know that we're going to get swamped. Maybe it's broken relationships or a health diagnosis for ourselves or a loved one. Personal failures that we can't get over, or situations out of our control for ourselves or for a loved one that we just know are going to swamp us. It's in those times we're not alone. Like Peter, we remember Jesus is there, extending that hand. No matter the size of the wave, no matter what it is, we are not riding in that canoe alone. It's Jesus reaching out the hand, saying storms are not going to win. Jesus Christ is present with us today, now, and always. Amen.